Greetings brothers, today we're looking at some of the best Brawler Dreadnoughts that we can pick for Blood Angels in the 9th edition. Welcome to the weekly tactics video. I'm John, the Blood Angels Commander, and if you're new here and you want regular Blood Angels content on your YouTube homepage, then please consider subscribing. So welcome back to all my regular viewers, and as we do every Friday, let's get right into it. So with Blood Angels now becoming Codex compliant, we have access to a few new Dreadnoughts, and the one that keeps bringing up and people mention in the weekly live show is the Ironclad Dreadnought. So we're going to compare the Ironclad Dreadnought against two other Brawler Dreadnoughts that we have, essentially our Death Company Dreadnought and our Leviathan Dreadnought with a claw and a drill. So we'll start by looking at the Warscroll, then we'll look at a bit of Math Hammer, see how good they are surviving and how much damage they can deal. Then we'll jump into like a bit about stratagems and tactics, and then finally we'll sum everything up and see what we've learned. And sorry, over the last few weeks I think a few people have said my videos have made them want to buy more models. Today might be no exception, so be prepared. If you want to continue the video, you may want to buy more models at the end of it, so let's go. So Leviathan Dreadnought is an interesting choice. You know, he comes in at 220 points, he does have those 14 wounds. If he takes a claw and a drill, then he sits with a base of 5 attacks. He has a good save and a good invulnerable save. And also he can be armed with essentially those 2 heavy flamers and the 2 melty guns. So kind of a beast in close combat and generally very survivable. Looking at the Ironclad, he comes in at 135 points, so almost half the points. I think it comes in about 61%. He does have the core rules, so any sort of re-rolls that you have, he could benefit from them. He does move a bit less, but he does have one more in the toughness, so I guess small arms fire like strength 4 weapons and below, he's going to be very difficult to wound, and he has the sort of standard 3+ and 8 wounds that normal Dreadnoughts do have. And then our Death Company Dreadnought is essentially one of our chapter specific ones. I picked the Death Company Dreadnought over the Furioso just because I think he is probably more iconic, and points cost and like damage wise he seems to be slightly ahead right now. So Death Company Dreadnought does get the Black Rage rule, which grants him essentially 1 additional attack, and he starts with 5, so I guess that puts him on a 6 base. He has a 3+ save, and then he does gain the Feel No Pain from the Black Rage, so he's got 6+ Feel No Pain. He's equipped with 2 Blood Talons, a Melty Gun and a Stormbolter. And I suppose I should have said here, the key reason of looking at the Ironclad is the Ironclad's equipped with that Seismic Hammer, the combat weapon, and then the same Melty Gun and Stormbolter. But the combat weapon and the Seismic Hammer together on the Ironclad are really interesting, because if the Ironclad Dreadnought is equipped with a Dreadnought combat weapon, then he gets to reroll 1s. It's a special rule called Wrecker, and his Seismic Hammer is -1 to hit, but with those reroll 1s kind of averages things out a bit. And the Seismic Hammer does do that flat 5 damage. So flat 5 damage and toughness 8 are the 2 things that I think people were very excited about for the Ironclad, and obviously being a Blood Angel we can get really strong wound rolls. So let's dive into basically survivability for all 3 Dreadnoughts first. So when we compare the Dreadnoughts in terms of raw survivability, we know the Leviathan's going to come on top just because he almost has double the wounds of the other 2 Dreadnoughts. However, if we actually look at the small arms fire column, which I guess would be our bolt rifles with just -1 AP strength 4, then the Ironclad does amazing against these. Basically because he's only going to be wounded on 6s, and then I guess he would have a 4+ save against these. So I guess lower AP weapons on lower strength, he's going to keep up with Leviathan there or thereabouts. Obviously at the higher APs and the more damage weapons, he's going to fall a bit behind, but remember he is only 61% of the points cost. The Death Company Dreadnought is interesting in that like he kind of keeps up with Ironclad because he has that 6+ Feel No Pain. I guess his Feel No Pain could be buffed if you wanted to spend 1 CP on Refusal to Die. But I mean overall it seems like Death Company against the Ironclad, there's no real inherent advantage to the Death Company Dreadnought. I mean, this is a little bit reminiscent of when we did the new video on like the Death Company, and we were just saying like they're not really as good as Vanguard Veterans now, or at least they're very much on par. Like there's nothing special about them, and I guess this Death Company Dreadnought to me, looking at these rules, feels exactly the same, or looking at the survivability feels exactly the same. Nothing is elevating him particularly over the Ironclad. I mean, I guess he gets a protection against mortal wounds, but again, it's just on a 6, so it's a 16% chance, so it's not really any sort of reliable protection. And then that one other thing to say, I guess, is the Death Company Dreadnought doesn't actually have the core rule, so there's no way to get him rerolls on his hits. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. The Blood Talons, will come to them in a minute, and they do give rerolls on wounds, so they will help in the damage section. But overall, like, looking at these right now and looking at the points, the Leviathan is interesting. Obviously, it's a lot of points. I'm not sure I'd run it as 2 close combat weapons, like, because it can probably do okay with some sort of shooting weapon on it. The Ironclad running with 2 close combat weapons seemed like a really interesting option, and then the Death Company Dreadnought seems average at best for survivability. So let's go on to damage next. If you enjoy this video or you get any value out of it, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button. It really helps the channel out, and I really appreciate the support, so thank you. So in this week's Math Hammer section, we're going to start and we're going to look at basically the Math Hammer throughout the game. We did this last week, and I think it gives you a really good picture of like when we have Shock Assault up, when we have Shock Assault and Savage Echoes, and then again we're going to include Null Zone, because I think Null Zone kind of synergizes with the Death Company and the Ironclad in that they have no invulnerable save, so using Null Zone around them is like a low risk play. So let's see how this all works out, and let's start by looking at Shock Assault. So if you're familiar with these graphs, and you'll see them every week on my channel, then green essentially means that this is the best result in the column, and orange means the second best. So because the Leviathan essentially does 5 attacks with the drill and 1 attack with the claw, you'd add these 2 numbers together, and then to the right we've got basically if you did all the attacks with the Seismic Hammer, SH, if you did all the attacks with the Ironclad combat weapon, ICW, and then the Blood Talons for the Death Company Dreadnought at the end. And obviously these are color coded with the Leviathan in cyan, the Death Company Dreadnought in the green, and the Ironclad in the orange. Now I have kept the chart with basically the most feared or the most difficult things for us to deal with right now. Stuff like Deathwing Knights, Blightlord Terminators, Galatas Dreadnoughts, Mortarion. All these things are big damage, scary units that we're going to have problems with dealing with right now. For example, like Sanguinary Guard will get deleted by these things when they attack them back, and they're probably not going to have enough to punch through them in a single turn. Maybe if you have the 10-man squad, maybe if you have a lot of rerolls, that's possible, but even if you do, there's a chance that, you know, you're going to lose units. So these things are generally very difficult to deal with at the moment for Blood Angels, so that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're comparing the damage, so hopefully it's quite helpful and informative. So as we look at the first chart with Shock Assault, you know, the Leviathan is going to be ahead in most of the situations here. Obviously it has access to that drill, which does additional damage to vehicles, but I mean, you can see that the Seismic Hammer, even in a few areas, can essentially pull ahead, just because that flat 5 damage can really start to tick over and do a lot of work in certain situations. You know, like on average, early in the game, the Ironclad is going to be able to do 6.48 wounds to a Dreadnought in a turn, and because he is core, there is ways, like you could give him the Blood Chalice ability, you could give him Chapter Master rerolls. So there is essentially ways to get that Ironclad buffed up very early in the game. The one issue you're going to have is obviously just the 6-inch movement. You could argue that the Death Company Dreadnought isn't going to have so many movement problems because he can Forlorn Fury for 2 CP, but it is only a 6-inch Forlorn Fury. I'm not sure that's worth 2 CP. Personally, I definitely think I wouldn't spend 2 CP on a Forlorn Fury for a Death Company Dreadnought. So moving on then into Shock Assault and Savage Echoes, and here we now see typically what you're going to expect from most of the game, right? Because in turn 1 you're not going to do too much combat, so you're likely just going to have that turn 2 results for a single turn, and then for the rest of the game out you're looking at Shock Assault and Savage Echoes on the charge, or when you're charged, or when heroic interventions happen. And what's interesting straight away is the Death Company Dreadnought actually comes ahead in 2 situations. He comes ahead when we're fighting against like low toughness characters, because he can reroll all his wounds because of the Blood Talons, and he comes ahead against like Deathwing Knights, again because he can reroll all his wounds, and obviously Deathwing Knights are not wounded on unmodified rolls of 1, 2 or 3. However, if we look down the charts again, you'll see that Leviathan is very solid. Obviously, with the points cost, you would expect it would be solid here. However, the Seismic Hammer on the Ironclad is really keeping up against a bunch of those difficult targets, against Mortarion, against Leviathan Dreadnought, Galatas Dreadnought, Blightlord Terminators. It's ahead in terms of raw damage against all of them. Against maybe like the Blightlords, it's probably not going to work out so well because you're basically going to overkill a couple of them with those 5 damage hits. But I guess every hit is going to kill a Terminator, even with the -1. So that is good, and you know, like I said, there is ways that we can get him into Savage Echoes earlier and buff him up and stuff like that, and he's going to be no chump when they come to attack him back with his toughness 8, and I guess even with the Death Guard aura from like the Blightlords, you'd still be looking at toughness 7, which is going to make him difficult to wound, right? So for the points cost here, the Ironclad again looks very interesting. I mean, the Death Company feels situational at best, you know, like you're occasionally going to fight something that can do unmodified 1s to 3s. Maybe you're going to fight other Marines that use transhuman, but it really feels situational. Whereas the Ironclad, I think in the middle here, feels like it could just jump in and do a lot of damage against a priority target. It needs to be brought down by your enemy. They're going to need high damage weapons or high strength weapons to do that, and it does have Duty Eternal, and it was keeping up averagely against those high AP weapons as well, and like small arms fire, it's kind of like irrelevant, you know, it can just walk through small arms fire, so it will soak up fire from the enemy, and they really can't let that Seismic Hammer get in combat. And again, because it's the older style Dreadnought, then there's no profile on it, right? So even if it survives on 1 health, it will still be rolling at full profile, so that part of it is quite scary as well. And then for slide number 3 for the Math Hammer, what we've done now is we've included that Null Zone aura. Now, if you watch the game that I played against Death Guard this week, Null Zone was amazing against the Terminators, especially Blood Angels deep into the game, right? Like her AP gets really high up, and you know, Null Zone is essentially removing any or all saves. And I think that's true for most of the situation here. So Leviathan again is just ahead on a couple of those points, right? Basically against the Land Raider and the infantry and the characters, he's minuscule amounts ahead, like less than a whole damage. And remember, he was basically almost double a point, 61% points is how much the Ironclad cost. Now against like Deathwing Knights, the Blightlord Terminators, the Galactus Dreadnought, the Leviathan Dreadnought, Mortarion, like the Ironclad can do a lot of damage at this point, you know, like 11.67 damage average against Blightlord Terminators, so you're pretty much going to kill 2 or 3 in a single turn if Null Zone is up. Against the Galatas, you're basically going to, you know, you're going to kill it outright. Like I believe the Galatas has 9 wounds, so you're going to kill it in a single turn. And against the Leviathan, 11.67 damage in a single turn average. You know, like basically you're going to put it in its bottom bracket. If you can charge it, you're going to bracket it down to the lowest bracket, and then that Leviathan is only going to be hitting you back on, I think at the lowest bracket now it's 5+ weapon skill, so it's kind of huge that 135 point model can do that. And then even against Mortarion, it's like going to average like 8 wounds, so you're almost going to take half of Mortarion's wounds from this Dreadnought just alone. And then again against a Land Raider, he can pretty much almost kill it. A little bit of luck there and you'd kill the Land Raider for sure. So Ironclad looking very interesting, especially for the points cost. I don't know if I could justify running just one of them, because you know, one of them might just get focused down very quickly in the battle, but like if you wanted to do 2, is that an interesting option? You know, like 2 really tough Dreadnoughts that the opponent literally cannot let get in combat with anything, and if he does, then they're starting to lose units pretty heavily, right? Like if he's going to be able to basically almost kill a Leviathan in a single turn, or a Land Raider, or just basically a Contemptor Dread or a Galatas Dread, he's going to kill in a single turn, and he's going to delete like half a squad of Terminators as well. Seems generally very strong. And then what's interesting, I've done in the last column on the slide in red, what I've actually thrown in there is Chapter Master rerolls, because he is core, right? And like personally, I run a Chapter Master. I know a lot of people run Dante. So if you have Dante or a Chapter Master on the battlefield, you can essentially throw him Chapter Master rerolls. And like, what does that do? Well, against Blightlord Terminators, you're now looking at 15 damage. Obviously, it would be split up, but you know, 3.5, maybe a little bit of luck, you're killing 4 Terminators in a turn. Against a Leviathan Dreadnought, he's actually fully killing it in a single turn. He's doing 15 damage and Leviathan only has 14 wounds. And then against Mortarion, you know, you're doing over half his damage. So the Death Company Dreadnought is just a good bit behind even the basic profile of the Ironclad Seismic Hammer. If we bring in the Chapter Master reroll Seismic Hammer, then it's just miles ahead. It's almost like the Blood Talons are comparable to like the Iron Hand combat weapon. So I guess if you really wanted to put like a gun on one of the Ironclads, you could. And I mean, it would still do okay in combat. Like, it's not bad. It's keeping up with the Death Company Dreadnought, who doesn't have any guns, right? So you could have a Hurricane Bolter or something on there. But, yeah, I mean, if you're just looking for the raw Brawler Dreadnought, which is essentially what this video is about, then the Ironclad with the 2 close combat weapons, in my opinion, is definitely something to consider for the future. So all 3 Dreadnoughts have access to Smokescreen and they all have Duty Eternal, and it's important to note that you need to have those 2 close combat weapons on the Ironclad to essentially get those reroll 1s and the Wrecker rule, which really buffs the Seismic Hammer. It's about a 10% buff there, but I guess you could ignore that if you had some other way to buff him, because he is core and he is the only one of these 3 Dreadnoughts who has that core keyword. So it's something to consider late in the game. You know, like if this guy is still alive late in the game, even if he's on 1 wound, you could throw him Chapter Master rerolls and he could do a lot of work for you just because you won't get profiled, and you know, the flat damage on the Seismic Hammer is amazing. So we've pretty much ignored all the shooting in this video, and I guess the Leviathan is ahead on the shooting. It does have like 2 heavy flamers and a meltagun. It is a lot more points, but I guess the flamers could be swapped out for Volkites or something. So Leviathan kind of fills the role as a Wrecker Dreadnought, but I think he works better as a Dreadnought with some shooting and like a drill or a claw. Like, he can still do pretty decent. The Death Company Dreadnought can get buffs from like Refusal to Die to give him that 5+ Feel No Pain. He can also Forlorn Fury for 2 CP, but where we stand right now, I just think he's a bit lackluster. Maybe if he'd kept his 8-inch move. I don't know why they nerfed it to 6, but at 6-inch move, I just feel like the Death Company Dreadnought is a little bit behind. And then the Ironclad, although it only gets the 6-inch move as well, it does have that additional toughness, and it does have the core keyword. So there is ways of like essentially keeping it a little bit more relevant throughout the battle. And yeah, exact same points as the Death Company Dreadnought. It makes me feel sad, right? It's like we've got these chapter specific stuff, and in 9th edition it just doesn't even feel special, or it doesn't feel like it's any better than the generic Space Marine stuff. Yeah, and that's sad. You know, like I recently just dropped Death Company from my army list and I'm put in Vanguard Veterans, and yeah, I mean, if I own a Death Company Dreadnought, but now I'm thinking if I'm going to field one, I'm probably thinking about like I should get an Ironclad because it just seems better against the units that we're having problems with, right? If you want a Dreadnought to just chew through infantry, then I guess the Death Company Dreadnought would do that due to his extra attacks, but I think we've got better tools for chewing through infantry. Like right now, Vanguard Veterans with Lightning Claws, you know, we talk a lot about them and just how great they are at surviving with their storm shields and how they can deep strike and they can chew through infantry. So I don't know if you're going to spend... It's 135 points for a Death Company Dreadnought. It's like 138, 140, I guess, for 4 or 5 Vanguard Veterans with the Storm Shield and Lightning Claw. I feel like you would spend those extra 5 points. You're getting 26 attacks with rerolls against like your 8 attacks with rerolls. Sure, your 8 attacks are essentially like coming in at strength 10 as opposed to your Lightning Claws coming in at strength 4, but with the Red Thirst rule, I would pick the 26 attacks every day of the week over the strength 10 ones. I think you're always going to come out on top with the Lightning Claw Vanguard Veterans in that situation. So yeah, Death Company Dreadnought right now, he doesn't feel very competitive. I don't know if I'm not fielding one in my army, and I can't foresee me doing it. Like, without a new codex, which we're not getting again in 9th edition, like, I think the Death Company Dreadnought is kind of irrelevant at this point. So if the Death Company Dreadnought's irrelevant, then we've got the 2 choices left. And we've already said the Leviathan works better as sort of like a combination of shooting and close combat, and I think he does both those things reasonably well. I am fielding one in my current army list, and I think You know, I'm in two minds between keeping Leviathan or running a Redemptor. I think they're very similar. I think Leviathan is more survivable, but you know, you pay 35 more points and you take a 1 CP hit to do that. So let's talk about the Ironclad, because obviously he's the core one and he's the new one that we have access to. And we already said against small arms fire, he's actually like 75% as survivable as the Leviathan. So, you know, 61% of the cost, but 75% survivable against those small arms fire, right? And then when we actually looked through all the different damage values from, you know, the beginning of the game all the way through to null zone, for the most part, he's keeping up like 95% of the Leviathan's damage, and occasionally he's beating him, right? So if you think about that, 61% of the cost, 95 to probably like 100% damage, and 75% survivability, and obviously no CP tax. That's very interesting. Obviously he does have a weakness, right, in that if he gets hit by like high AP weapons, high strength weapons, I guess when I mean high strength, I mean toughness 8 or higher, or strength 8 or higher, he essentially can be brought down. But at the, you know, at the 61% points cost, there is an argument to be said, like, would 2 of these Dreadnoughts just be a lot stronger than a single Leviathan? You know, at that point, they would definitely be a lot stronger against the small arms fire, and against like the heavier weapons, it would kind of start to even out, right? So I guess like you're talking 50 more points if you did that. But when we actually looked at the damage, like the amount of damage 2 of these guys could do on the battlefield is kind of scary. So 2 of these guys with a null zone will kill Mortarion in a single turn, you know? They'll kill 2 Leviathans, 1 each. They can kill a Leviathan if we have null zone up as well. So we talk a bit about synergies, and I've recently been able to get back on the table, and for the first time I've actually been using null zone, and you know, I synergized it with a chaplain on a bike who had a flat 4 damage, and I think we wiped out the Death Shroud in a single turn of combat, right? So if we had flat 5 damage, arguably we could do the same. I'm trying to think about my list, and like if I could just lose the Leviathan, because I actually would kind of like the CP back, and put in 2 Ironclads, would my list feel stronger? And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking it might. You know, they're threats that have to be dealt with. They cannot be left into close combat. You have 2 of them, so they can either just push into the middle of the map, or they can go up a flank together. And I guess, you know, the Leviathan can never gain Chapter Master rerolls. This obviously can. It is core, so we can even put it into Assault Doctrine earlier as well if the enemy goes like heavily on the offense against us. I guess if you had 2 of them in the Blood Chalice, you'd actually put them both in Assault Doctrine in turn 2. And I guess if you just want to do more consistent hits as well, you don't always have to hit with the Seismic Hammer, right? You hit with the Seismic Hammer against those big units that need to take a lot of damage, but if you don't want to take the -1 to hit, you can just hit them with your combat weapon, and you hit on 3s, reroll 1s, so it's a little bit more reliable. Remember, all my graphs that we're looking at the most difficult things to kill, right? We're not looking at easy targets anymore. I know previously we looked at sort of like a broad spectrum of easy targets. Last few weeks we've been looking at those difficult targets, and I guess as new codexes come out, we'll continue to look at difficult things, because we want to know how we're going to do against the difficult things, against the easy things. If we're able to kill the difficult things, then we'll definitely be able to kill the easy things, right? So one thing to maybe say is if you do have 2 of them, then sometimes your opponents may end up splitting their fire and not killing either of them. I mean, that is a thing that happens in 40k, you know, they try and kill one thing, they're confident they can kill it, they don't kill it, they leave it on 1 wound, and then you've got 2 Dreadnoughts, and as I said, even on 1 wound, they're still fighting on full profile, Chapter Master rerolls, you know, and the amount of things that these guys can actually kill, like the difficult targets, it's really quite impressive. I mean, this is why I really like high flat damage weapons, right? Because you remove that element of randomness, and although Warhammer is a dice game, sometimes removing those random elements can really help you to win games. And yeah, the one thing I haven't even said is the Seismic Hammer is essentially -5 after turn 3 as well. So basically, if you remove the null zone, then they get no invulnerable save, and if they don't have an invulnerable save, then, you know, essentially they're getting no save. So that removes an element of chance, right? So like if you hit a Land Raider, for example, and you wound it, there is no chance it saves. And sometimes removing those elements of chance can actually help you in games. So, you know, I've previously run the Super Heavy Tank, and I just love its flat 6 damage weapon. we blow up rhinos every single day because, you know, 2 failed saves and it's just like flat 12 damage, that's your rhino gone. Like it's super strong, and I think that the 5 damage Seismic Hammer is really interesting as well, right? So it can basically do the same thing, and I mean it's kind of a cool model as well. If you don't own a Ironclad Dreadnought, then I guess Google it on the Games Workshop site. I hadn't even seen it until recently because, as I said, we weren't Codex compliant before, so it was a model that we didn't have access to till the 9th edition. So thank you to one of our community members, Highland Phoenix, that suggested that we look at the Ironclad. Underneath in the video description, if you'd like to join as a member or even support us on Patreon, those are a couple of options that are available now. I mean, we do spend a lot of time every week putting together Bloody Angels content, and all the members and patrons are really appreciated. So we'll be back on Sunday at 4 PM for our live army list show, and if you want to submit your list, then you can do that over in the community page of the YouTube channel. And then starting this Monday at 7:30 UK time, we will be back with our weekly live show, and that will be every week, 7:30 Monday night, and it will be Blood Angels versus something. So we'll try and play a different army, or we'll get revenge. Like this week we need to beat the Custodes to get some revenge after last week's loss, but we'll play a different battle every Monday night, so that's something that you can start tuning into and hopefully you can enjoy. And we did have some issues, I think, this week with the camera quality, so we have ordered some new equipment, so hopefully we're going to have a better overall streaming performance next week. Thanks so much for watching, I really appreciate it. I hope to see you all in the next video. By the blood are we made, brothers. Peace.